Good morning. Welcome to part 3 in a series called How to Be Rich. I sure hope that you have been a part of the first 2 in this series. Otherwise, I've got to catch you up a little bit because I know it never fails. Someone will be here for the very first Sunday, and they're like, well, I don't like to come to church. Why not? Well, a lot of these churches, they're just out for your money. It's just all about money. And then, somebody invites them. Oh, no, First Baptist's not like that. No, you should come hear the new preacher. And then they're here, and they're literally, how to be rich. They're like, wonderful, great. So first of all, if you're here for the first time, welcome. And secondly, we don't apologize for this series, but it does take a little bit of explaining as to why we would name a series with the ridiculous title, How to Be Rich. And I say ridiculous, it's meant to be provocative. It's meant to be thought-provoking, right? The idea here is that everybody's got a get-rich-quick scheme. Everybody's going to tell you how to get rich, but who's telling you how to be rich? And I got the idea of the title and much of the series from a book I read by Andy Stanley called How to Be Rich, being rich in ways that matter most. And so if you want to check that book out and dive more deeply into this material, you can. But the series really turns on that little word, how to be rich, not how to get rich, whatever. And it's obviously the idea here is simple, that rich is such a subjective thing that nobody ever admit, or it's hard to admit that we are in fact rich. So when do you cross the rich line? When do you go from not rich, not rich, not rich to rich? And for most of us, it's somewhere out there, right? The line keeps moving, and very few people admit like, I crossed it, and maybe I crossed it years ago. And what that does, see, if you don't just come right out and admit, you know what, honestly, from a global perspective, I probably am the rich, right? Even if you make minimum wage in this country, you're the top 1% of the world. And what that does, the value of that is it deflates arrogance. It lets you sort of, how do I say this? You know what? It lets you off of always saying, well, if I were rich, then I'd be generous. And a lot of us let ourselves off the generosity hook because we say, well, one day, if I became rich or if I had their money, I would do this or that. And the point of this message is, well, okay, well, you do. You're more rich. Okay, so how generous will you be? Will you be good at being rich? And so the first part of the message, the first part of the series, people got that. I think a lot of folks, and there have been some humorous results. Folks have come up to me. One lady's like, listen, my husband is certain he's listening. He gets it. We're rich. We're going to be bankrupt by the end of the week, okay? We're spending like we're rich, so can you please clarify? So just funny, right? You get the idea. But the point was very serious. God has blessed me. Remember this? God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich. And just coming out and admitting it. It's one of the first steps. No more denial, no more arrogance. God has blessed me with more than I need. I'm rich. You ready to say it again? Just as a review from part 1 of the series. God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich. You ready? 1, 2, 3. God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich, okay? And then last week, very good, we looked at how wealth has these sneaky side effects, arrogance, and the migration of hope. The idea is you start out trusting in a provider, but little by little, money, you start to trust in provisions, and money lies and says, if you get a bigger stack of tickets, right? If you get a bigger stack of wealth, it can bring you security. It can bring you happiness, and these are lies. And to fight back against that migration of hope, that movement of trusting, instead of trusting God, trusting riches, our statement last week was, I will not place my hope in riches, right? Why would we do that? Why would we trust provisions when we've got the provider? So I will not place my hope in riches, give it a little attitude, right? But in the God who richly provides. So I'll say it and then we'll say it together. I will not place my hope in riches, but in God who richly provides. You ready? This is part 2. Let's just review it here. You ready? Give it some attitude. 1, 2, 3. I will not place my hope in riches, but in richly provides. All right. A little less attitude this week, but I understand. We're warming up. That's fair. If you weren't here, a lot of this will just sound weird, but I hope you get the point of what we're saying, that we have to admit we are the ones who are rich, and we have to guard against the side effects, the danger, the disease that comes with wealth. And I ended the sermon last week of saying, how can we do it? How can we push back against the migration of hope, this temptation to trust in riches? Is there any hope? What can we do? And I basically ended with, come back next week. It's kind of a cliffhanger, right? And that's, and I know many of you cannot wait until today. Some of you came to the early service, and you're just back here because you couldn't wait. What can we do against the migration of hope? What do we do against this disease? And it's real. It's real. And it's spreading, and it's like a virus. It is, many of you know all too well, right? Been going around the city and the county and the whole country, right? The virus, the flu, right? What about wealth? Wealth brings a disease. And it comes, and unlike the influenza, this disease lies to you. And unlike influenza, where you know you've got this disease masks its symptoms until it's too late. The disease of wealth over time that can affect your heart, I call it affluenza. Jackie was like, "You're not going to say that." I was like, "Oh, I'm going to say it." Affluenza is sneaky because it masks its symptoms. Am I right? When you get the flu, some of you have battled the flu. In fact, raise your hand if you've recently had the flu so that everyone on your pew, I'm kidding, right? Everybody's like, avoid! All right, here we go. If you've had, I'm kidding, if you've had influenza this year or in past years, am I right? You know. The thing about influenza, it's terrible and it can kill and it's an awful disease. But back me up on this. You know when you get it, right? It doesn't lie. You know when you get it. In fact, your whole household knew when you got it. Some of you, your whole neighborhood knew when you got it, right? I mean, right? You let the whole city know. They could tell, what is that bawling that's coming out of that, right? Bad news. Here's the thing about affluenza. Imagine a disease where it doesn't show any side effects. In fact, the first thing affluenza does is tell you, you're not rich. This sermon's for other people. Right? You look at 1 Timothy 6:17. We'll go back there. This has been our home base for these messages. You look at 1 Timothy 6:17, and it says, command those who are rich in this present world. And if you struggle with affluenza, the first thing that happens is it turns that part off. It says, no, this is for other people. See, right there. You can turn this out. You can tune this out. This is for other people. It tells you not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And so affluenza tells you you're not rich. It tells you you'd be happy. Actually, affluenza lies and tells you you'd be happy with just a little bit more. Come on, you don't need to be a bazillionaire, affluenza tells you. Don't go crazy. But don't you need just a little bit more to be really secure? Don't you need just a little bit more? Don't you need to be in a little bit better place if you're really going to have happiness? Oh, not for you, for your kids, right? For others. Listen, to be really secure, you can build an unscalable wall and money can give that. It's a lie. It's affluenza. Worst of all, it'll tell you you are incredibly generous when you're just average generous. One of the lies, and what this message is going after here is, if you don't do what we're talking about today, if you don't fight against affluenza, you need to hear me clearly. You will not be evil, you will not be wicked, you will be average. And rich people have no excuse for being average in their good deeds and their generosity. We're to be rich in good deeds and rich in generosity. Does that make sense? We're going to be average. Specifically, look at verse 18. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In other words, affluence is going to lie to you and tell you you're being generous when you're just average people generous. Let me explain. Affluenza lies and tells us we're way more generous and way more kind-hearted than we are. When in fact we're just average. For example, if you're walking in Walmart and somebody drops their wallet, you go and you chase them down and you here's your wallet. You didn't even rifle through it to find anything interesting, right? You just gave them their wallet. And affluenza goes, look at you. You're a good Samaritan. You're better than everybody. That's called being a human being. That's not generous. That's called humanity, right? Or Coleman's just filled with nice people, but they're just you're going to do that. My point is, you're not going to be evil and wicked. You're just going to be average. And the Bible says in verse 18, we got to be rich in good deeds. I walked from here one day, someone asked me to meet at Grumpy's for lunch. Grumpy's, if you don't know where this is, it's less than 2 blocks away from here. And it was not one of those bitter cold days, and so I decided, well, why would I drive? It's just two blocks away. I'll just walk there, right? No fewer than 2 strangers pulled up next to me and asked me if I needed a ride. I tried to explain the word pedestrian. They're like, huh? So I just went on. But I thought, my point is, it's so incredibly nice. It's just so generous, right? Why I would just walk. And my point is, if you're not careful, affluenza says that's what it means to be generous. That's what it means to be kind. But that's not what we're commanded to do. It says be rich. It doesn't say be average in good deeds. Be rich in good deeds. We've got to fight against affluenza. Now, here's the problem. It's not enough to just react. You need, if you're going to really fight against the problems of wealth, you need to get out ahead of this thing. What you need is a vaccination. You need a vaccine against affluenza. All right? And there is one. There is one. So, in 1783, a doctor named Edward Jenner had this crazy idea. Edward Jenner is in Europe. He's specifically in England, and smallpox is decimating Europe. I mean, wiping out entire families. It's killing, particularly children. And can you imagine, as parents, all you can do is nervously wait and see which kid is going to have those deadly boils, which were the first symptom, appear first, quarantine them off, and hope you caught it in time, knowing full well that's probably a death sentence for that kid. It's wiping out everybody. Edward Jenner's here's folklore, legend, that there were these milkmaids, right? Dairy cow farmers, these ladies that would milk the cows and carry it out. And that they would occasionally contract a disease they called it cowpox. And there was this legend that these women who had cowpox and gotten sick were suddenly like immune. They were like shielded against smallpox. And they would go in and they would work with these. And no matter what they did or how they came in contact with these people, they were shielded against smallpox. They had this lesser disease, cowpox, from working with cows, but it didn't kill them. It wasn't fatal. So Jenner had this crazy idea. He went and tested it, and sure enough, would get people. Now imagine this. He would get people to take live, how do I say this delicately, the liquid from a cow's boil who had cowpox, right, and get that into them. And by doing this, by purposefully making themselves sick with cowpox, they would then go through a season of sickness, and it would be awful, and it would be miserable. And then they would be, in fact, immune from smallpox. And cowpox generally, it wasn't fatal. It made you sick. It was unpleasant. But then they would be immune from the thing that would kill you. And he began to save lives and save families and save hundreds and hundreds of lives. And when he published it in his journal, he nicknamed this little invention he was doing. He named it after the Latin word for cow, which is vacca. He called it a vaccination or the vaccine. That's where we get the name. That's why it's from cowpox. Who's the first person to sign up for that, though? Let me see if I understand this. I'm perfectly healthy, and my family's perfectly healthy. That's right. You want me to get cowpox on purpose. That's right. But this looks like it came from a cow's boil that had cowpox. That's not important where it came from, right? Yes, it did. That's right. So I'm going to get sick on purpose. That's right. And it'll save your life. When it comes to generosity, which is the vaccine against influenza, you got to understand how radical that is. I'm healthy. Why would I make myself sick? When it comes to generosity in this culture, you got to remember, your whole life you've been trained when it comes to money, get more, accumulate more. You're going against something that is tearing against the fabric of what culture has taught you. You're doing something, and it might just save your life. So when somebody has cowpox, they're like, wait, my whole life I've been told if I don't have a disease, run from something called cowpox, right? And run toward health. It's the same thing when it comes to money, when it comes to generosity. It's a vaccine. I know that some of this stuff, you may go, whoa, that was like a shot in my arm. I mean, some of the stuff we're going to talk about today about giving, you're going to say, wait, remember, it is a vaccine against affluenza. And if you believe that the dangers are real, if you believe that these verses in Timothy are for you, then here we go, the disease. The disease is affluenza. The vaccine is generosity. Command them to do good. That means two things. Be rich in good deeds and generous and willing to share. Simply, rich in good deeds means your time. Generous and willing to share means your money. In other words, don't just be average with your time and your money. Leverage your resources, and by your resources, I mean your time and your money. We could talk about talents, but it's not really as applicable here, but it certainly could be. Time, talents, and treasure, however you want to word that. But you leverage this stuff to be rich in good deeds, not just average. Now, in case you didn't hear that, I slipped that in there, that you are rich in time. If you thought the first part of the series, I had a hard job to convince people who are struggling with bills and all this stuff that they were in fact rich in money. Imagine trying to convince a group of people that you are in fact rich in time. Look at you. You have all this spare time, right? Like nobody even bothers smiling. That would take too long. You're like, yeah. Just make this fast, preacher, right? Nobody in here has spare time. Not a single one of you is bottling up time just in case you need it later, right? There's not a single person that's like, I've got nothing to do for the next 4 days. Nothing. I wonder how I'll fill them up, right? That's not your world right now, right? And I've got to convince you that you, in fact, from a global perspective, you have time. You have time, and you can use it to be rich in good deeds and generous and willing to share. And I know that's a tough job, so I won't belabor this point. But just like, how did I convince you with money? We talked about from a global perspective, right? You look around and you go, well, I guess from a global perspective, maybe I am rich in money. Okay, so let's talk global perspective. The more money you have, the more discretionary time you have. So just as a survey, how many of you, to get clean water for you and your family today, to have clean water, how many of you spent more than 2 hours going to collect clean water for your family today? Anybody over 2 hours? Exactly. You just went to the sink. Okay? Some of you opened the refrigerator to get some ice and then got water. How many of you didn't even have to open your refrigerator door? Right? What are you doing with all that time you're saving? I mean, that's 4 hours a day that most people have to go and get clean water. There's 4 hours. 8, 12, vacation. Right? What are you doing, right? Some of you use 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner. That's 30 seconds a day. That's like hours on the year, huh? What are you doing with it? You're doing what we all do with it. We just assume we're giving more time. Listen. When it comes to discretionary time and it comes to discretionary money, back me up on this, it just gets spent if you don't have a plan for it. Am I right? It just gets spent. It's just gone. We just assume that the more God gives us, if we get more wealth or we get more discretionary time, this is the problem of affluenza. We just begin to assume that God gave it to us for us to consume, right? We have an assumption that anything God gives us is just for our consumption. We have a consumption assumption. I didn't even bother to run that one by you. Yeah, I just kind of was freewheeling that one. Yeah, why? We just assume if God put it in my hand, it's got to be for me. We've got to fight against that with our time and with our money. And the vaccine of generosity, if you're a note taker, here we go. The vaccine of generosity, it's almost like those shots where you need multiple boosters or stages. And here they are. And we'll lay they all start with P. By the way, this will be helpful. 3 P's in a pod. You ready? You got it? The generosity has the 3 P's. First of all, generosity needs to be this: priority generosity. The first P is priority. You want to get serious in a battle against affluenza? Make your giving priority giving. Priority, as in prior, as in before, right? How do you be rich in good deeds? Not just average in good deeds, but be rich in good deeds. Well, how would a financial planner tell you to build wealth today? Money's probably an easier example than time. Most people get this more quickly. Would a financial planner tell you, honestly, just like spend whatever you want on yourself, and then like if occasionally there's anything left over, you should think about like putting it in a savings account somewhere, like save a little bit, and then maybe invest a little bit. But like, do it after you've spent everything on yourself. Is that what they're going to tell you? No, they're going to give you some common sense thing like spend what is left after saving. Don't save what's left over after spending, right? They're going to tell you off the top, dollar cost averaging or something, or have your employer keep some and put it in a 401k or something. You understand? They understand priority giving. Hey, I know it's easy to, it's some people's hobby, in fact, to make fun of the government. I get that it's easy, and you look at their ineptitude and all that. No, they're shut down and all that. It's easy to make fun of the government. I'll tell you one thing they get right. I'll tell you one thing they are very wise, very smart about. They understand priority giving. Because when it comes to taxes, Uncle Sam knows to get his cut off the top, right? He doesn't wait around. You get your net pay. Why? Because before you even touch it, before it hits your direct deposit, Uncle Sam gets hit. Can you imagine in this country if they just waited to the end of the year and billed everybody for their taxes? Here, pay us by April 15th. Here's what you owe in taxes. You'd have to build a lot more federal prisons, right? So everybody be like, oh, yeah, look, I totes meant to pay that. I just, they were having a sale at the Polaris store, and I guess your share got spent, right? It just goes away. Why? Priority Giving off the top, ahead of time, pre-decide from your first paycheck before everything else gets paid to be rich in good deeds and generous in share. It's got to become a priority. Here's the way Proverbs chapter 3 says it. Of all the things you could do with your wealth, not just consume it, the best use of your, and here wealth, I mean time and money both, all inclusive, is to what? Honor the Lord with your wealth. Here's how to do it. Honor the Lord with your wealth. You want to get serious about leveraging everything you have for his glory? He's been so good to you. You're overflowed with joy and gratitude and living a life of freedom. What do? Honor the Lord with your wealth. Here's how. With the leftovers after you've consumed what you want. No. With the first fruits of all your crops. First fruits there needs no explanation, as in the first, off the top. Now, crops, for some people, crops would be applicable today to your paycheck. Your paycheck is when you harvest the crops of your hard work. Fine. So it could be that you, on the 15th and the 30th of every month, that's your crops. That's your harvest season. Others of you, if you're into farming, you may literally harvest crops. And that's when some of you own a business. And so for you, you don't harvest till the end of the year. And that's when, it doesn't matter the when or the timing. The question is, whenever you harvest, is your first thought, priority, giving? Generosity, to be truly generous. If you don't, here's what you'll be. Average. You'll still give, you'll still, you'll still do those things, but it will ultimately, if it's sporadic and spontaneous, it'll in the end be sparing. And that's not what we want to be. That's no hope against affluenza. It's got to be priority giving. Why do, when people want to start a new exercise habit, why is the advice always the same? If you want to get into running every day or whatever, do it. When do they tell you to do it? Do it first thing in the morning. Why? Because the day just kind of gets away. What if in fact they tell you, preachers do this, right? Oh, you got to have a quiet time every day, right? You got to read your Bible and pray, right? When do they tell you? I was hoping when I asked, when do they tell you to do it, it wouldn't be rhetorical, and everyone would say, first thing in the day, and that would give me time to take a drink of water. That's okay, we'll get to know each other more. First thing in the day, right? Get it over with quickly so that, why? Because if you don't, the day's gonna get away from you. Get that exercise over with. Linger when it comes to the Bible. Same thing when it comes to your giving. If you're not intentional, it'll just be gone. What about your time? What if you were, how do you do that? Some of you are better at this. Actually, a lot of you are good at priority giving with your money, right? You just are. You've done it, you've grown up with it. And so I hope this message is not so much a challenge to you, but an affirmation and an encouragement to, keep good, keep going. You're being rich in good deeds, generous and willing to share. But what about your time? How many of you sit down at the beginning of a year, like it's January, and you go, all right, how are we going to spend our time to make our priority time for the Lord? Right? I mean, how many, I'm a college student, and I get Wednesdays where I don't have any class. You know what? They look like they're having a blast over at the student building. And I remember how incredible it was when a college student poured into me when I was a youth. Maybe, you know what? I may want to go join that. And that's how I'll spend my priority time. Or maybe one guy told me that, he said, look, my company gives me 3 weeks of vacation in a year. And the first thing they do when they plan as a family is decide which of those weeks they're going to take as their family mission trip. And the other 2 weeks are for them. And I asked him, I said, how's that working? He says, every year, you look back, it is always our favorite week. I'm like, what about Disney? He said, oh, it kills the mouse. Right? Why? It's priority giving. That doesn't happen spontaneously. That doesn't, because you got to plan. It takes work. But you see what he's doing? He's saying, for my family, first fruits of my time, first fruits of my money. And what do we get? We get leftovers. Huh? Like you're right? Thanksgiving meal or a big party. Everybody's coming over. Can you imagine serving leftovers? Here, open this Tupperware. Heat that up. See what's in there. Ooh, smell it. Right? No, never. You serve this beautiful banquet, this big meal. And after it's done, who are the leftovers for? They're for us, right? They're in-house. They're for us to enjoy later. But we don't serve the guests of honor our leftovers. No. That's it. When you do priority giving, what you're saying is, God first and best, you bless. I'm returning this to you, right? The leftovers are for me and my family. And you know a secret that everybody kind of knows? It's kind of an open secret. The leftovers are what? Awesome, exactly. Everybody in here knows the leftovers are wonderful. And as you begin to be a priority giver, what you realize is you can't outgive God. And you learn to say, Lord, this is all yours. My family is fine with the leftovers. The priority time goes to you, and the priority money goes to you. And God, give me the leftovers under the blessing of God, and you keep the 100% if it doesn't have God's blessing. Right? I'll take the God-blessed leftovers. So that's the priority thing. These others aren't as long, but they derive from that. So the vaccine here, the generosity vaccine, is about priority giving. And the second P is percentage giving. Percentage giving. Affluence is sneaky, and here's how it works. Part of why people get self-deceived and become average in good deeds is because as they grow in wealth, watch this, as you grow in wealth, the dollar amounts you're able to give get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start to actually impress yourself. When in fact, your percentage may have remained the same or gone down. How can I make such a bold statement? Because statistics bear this out. The wealthier people get in this country, the percentage they give away goes lower. That is a travesty. That is incredible. You and I all say the same thing. If we ever had real wealth, if these people that are richer than us, we would give more and more and more. Actually, statistically, we'd probably give less and less and less. Why? Because we would start to believe our own hype. We would say, man, I've never written a check this big in my life. Are you kidding? Wow, I'm super generous. No, because as a percentage, you're actually you're average. So right around 6%, if you're curious of what the tax return data is, it's right around 6% charitable giving, right? So that's just kind of average giving. That's what everybody does. That's no way to be rich in good deeds. So the Bible teaches not only priority giving, but percentage giving, to go home and not avoid this subtle trap, to go home and think about it. We live on a percentage of what we earn. Sometimes we live on 110% of what we earn, right? Right? But the idea is, okay, so what percent do we return to the house of the Lord? Jesus, to illustrate this, there's this incredible story in Scripture. In Mark chapter 12, verse 41, you can turn there. I've also got it up here on the screens. This is incredible. Jesus does a little bit of there's a scene where he talks about percentage giving. Verse 41 says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Let's just pause and ponder that moment. Jesus goes into the temple with his disciples. He's sitting there, and he's watching the people as they put their offerings in. This is Jesus watching you put your offering in. Like, it's a little intimidating when the ushers come by, you know, and you almost want to explain, I give online. I'm not a deadbeat, right? Right? Imagine Jesus, the Lord of glory. Really? Really? After all I've done for you. Right? Right? And so there's this moment where Jesus is watching everybody. It's got to be a little unnerving. And so many rich people threw in large amounts, right? Filled with affluenza, we not only patting ourselves on the back for our generosity, we also believe the lie that somehow this can impress God. Right? Large amounts. Can you imagine? Large amounts. Look how much I'm giving, Jesus. Where'd you get that money? I made it from the fields. Who made the fields? You did. I see your point. It's already yours. Right? This is like when your kid asks to borrow 6 pence from you because you apparently live in England in the 1800s. And then he takes it, and he turns out he used the 6 pence to go and buy you a birthday gift. It warms your heart, but you're 6 pence none the richer, as Lewis says, right? You didn't gain anything on the transaction. It warmed your heart, but come on, everything we have is on loan from God. It all belongs to God. But anyway, these people are putting in, okay, so back to the story. They're putting in these massive, dropping in huge offerings, big coins and bills, and how many zeros does gazillion have? Right? And they're making this big to-do about it, right? And they're filling up the treasury. Jesus is watching it all. But a poor widow, verse 42 says, a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. So she's walking in among all these rich people. She sees Jesus of all days, right? And she sneaks in. Some commentators say this was the smallest amount that they would even count. Anything smaller than this. They had units of currency maybe that were smaller, but they wouldn't even cash them because they weren't even worth enough to take to the bank. So she comes in, she sneaks them in. Maybe nobody will see. Maybe nobody will see. Drop. and slowly begins to sneak away. And Jesus says, hold up, stop. And she's like, busted, right? Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow. And she's like, seriously? Seriously? I give online, right? Or something, right? So nervous. And Jesus is calling her out. She goes, really, Jesus? You're going to call me out in front of everybody? This poor widow. And all the rich are like, let her have it, Jesus. It's about time somebody, I'm sick of this whole welfare system where we pay all this money. And I get it, everybody needs a hand up, but this is different. This is a hand out. And I know she's probably got, 10 cell phones, and she's probably working the system. So let her have it, Jesus. Come on, what is it going to be? Jesus, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. To which everybody paused. She gave more. Okay, Jesus, you're obviously not a math person. She did not give more. In fact, she gave tiny, tiny amounts. We gave a huge amount. How can it possibly be that this teeny amount is financially more? And he explains it. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything. All she had to live on. And you see the point right away. Jesus may have been indicting a corrupt system where the religious elite grew fat and widows were crushed. He may have been foreshadowing the destruction of the temple system, all that. But at the very least, he was redefining for us the word more. Jesus says that this woman's gift was financially more. Why? Because God is not and has never been moved by a dollar amount, but the heart of God has been stirred by a percentage. And that percentage giving, everybody in here feels that. You and I both know there are times in your life when a $1,000 gift, a charitable gift, would have been incredible for you, and there's times in your life when a $1,000 gift would have been an embarrassment, perhaps. Why? Because it all depends. Are you giving out of the abundance or the amount of sacrifice? The percentage, you see. The getting your head around this percentage sometimes takes a little bit of thinking, but it's easy to begin to pat ourselves on the back when our dollar amounts grow in our giving, but not in our percentage. Now, what percent, you may ask? All right, then. So, since we're getting down to brass tacks here, what percentage are you saying then belongs to God? And that one's easy. 100. 100% of everything you have belongs to God. That's why in the Old Testament, when Jesus instructed the Israelites in Malachi 3:10 to get all the tithe into the storehouse, you'll notice he didn't say, give to God the tithe. He said, bring to God. Bring it on back. Why? Because it's already God's. It started as God's. You've been blessed. It already belongs to God. Every dollar in there belongs to God. And the tithe is returning unto God, or the percentage giving is returning unto God. Now, where then does this tithe come from? What's an Old Testament command? Tithe just means tenth. And God commanded the Israelites in the Old Testament that 10% would be the literally returning unto the house of the Lord. Many New Testament Christians believe that the 10th may be a good starting place to develop the spiritual discipline of tithing, right? Of percentage giving. Now, for some of you, that is incredibly shocking. Others of you, you grew up in churches, and this is all, like we've got this weird kind of two audiences here, right? Some of you, you grew up in this, and you're like, tithe. Yeah, I knew what tithe means. I knew it meant 10. Sometimes when I played football, I'd say, first and tithe. I mean, it's how I speak. I get it. It means 10%. 10% off the top goes to God. What's the problem? Others of you are like, whoa. Are you for real suggesting that people give 10% of their income, like, to the local church? That is mind-blowing. That is insane. That's incredible, right? I get that. So if you ask me, Tom, are you straight up saying that you expect everybody to be a percentage giver to Coleman First Baptist Church? I would say, of course not. It's incredibly presumptuous. I expect members to be percentage givers to Coleman First Baptist Church, right? Oh, that sounds like a serious commitment. Yeah, you should come to Discover First today. Yeah, it's much worse. Here, look, the point is, The point is what? The point is, who am I? That's between you and the Lord. But I'll say this, when it comes to the tithe, to honor the fact that there may be here folks that didn't grow up in it, let me explain. I grew up in this world. I grew up as a Southern Baptist. I grew up in these church. So my dad, when I was a kid, my dad gave me and my 2 sisters an allowance. And the allowance he gave us was 50 cents. We got 50 cents allowance. I didn't grow up in the 20s. Like 50 cents. If you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like much. It's not. But I'm not bitter. I've gotten over it. But like 50 cents, seriously. But here's the thing. 2 things my dad did. And if you've ever done this for your children or you do this for your grandchildren, you don't know what a gift it is. 50 cents allowance, 2 things. Number 1, payday was the first day of the week. Payday was Sunday morning before church. We'd come down for breakfast, and there was allowance. There it was, 50 cents. You see what he was doing? He was teaching priority giving. And the second thing, he taught us percentage giving. He would never pay us in 2 quarters. You get it? He'd give us a quarter, maybe 2 dimes and a nickel. Why? Because the tithe of 50% is 5 cents. It's a nickel, and that nickel belongs to God. Why? Because the first and best, God will bless. I grew up my whole life. I never knew anything different, right? And so we give that, we drop our little nickel in there, right? And everything else is for us, right? I mean, the first and best goes to God, and then the 45 cents is for us to enjoy. We could save a month and buy a candy bar, But you get it, right? And then I'd start mowing lawns, and I'd get to be a teenager, mow lawns, and I'd mow a lawn. Payday was still Sunday morning. It never changed. And we'd come downstairs, and I'm like, why are you paying Dad? I did all the work, whatever. But Dad was the paymaster, and there it was. He would come down. If I made $20 mowing the lawn, he'd pay me, and there's waiting when we came downstairs was $20. But it wouldn't be a 20. It'd be a 10 and a 5 and some singles. Why? Because 10% of $20 is $2, and that $2 does what? It belongs to the Lord. It's returned back to the house of the Lord. You understand? I grew up in this. And that means that when I started from 50 cents, a nickel, to $20, you get in seminary, and then you have negative money, and you got to kind of figure out, do I go to church to receive? Anyway, but then but you finally get a job, and what do? It's not a big deal. A 10th belongs to the Lord. If you didn't grow up in this, if this is new to you, I understand it may be mind-boggling, and it may seem presumptuous for a pastor to stand in front of his people and say the ancient Israelites, in all their poverty, God asked them to return 10% to the Lord. And to us who live under his grace, who live in the new covenant, to say, well, how much can I get away with? 10%. I don't know, net or gross. It doesn't have the heart of percentage giving that our Father wants for us. I can't help but think you'll end up being sporadic and spontaneous and ultimately average without priority giving, percentage giving, and this last one, and we'll just touch on this very quickly, priority giving, percentage giving, and progressive. What do I mean by that? Progressive. Remember the whole vaccine analogy? It takes booster shots, right? For maximum effectiveness, certain vaccines, you need a booster. What I mean by progressive giving is simply this. When the Bible says command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and generous and willing to share, it means that for those of us who have been percentage giving for years and years and years, if God has continued to bless you, it's probably time to progress in that percentage. I just told a story about how I gave 10% when I was like a 6-year-old with my 50 cents allowance. Should I really be proud if I'm still at that same percentage now that I'm 40? Like, what else do I brag about that I still do exactly like I did when I was 6? Right? I mean, I tie my shoes a little better now, I speak more clearly now. There's nothing that I want to say, oh, when I was 6, that was the zenith of my skill at this thing. I want to grow in that. And the same thing when it comes to giving. I want to grow in progressive giving, get better at it. So priority giving, percentage giving, and progressive giving are a generosity to allow us to do what? To do good, to be rich in good deeds, and be generous and willing to share. Now, as we close out this series next week, I hope that we're inspired in this, and we're going to talk about that treasure, that last verse in this passage. Chuck's going to come and lead us in a time of response and invitation. And I wanted to add this last thing. I wouldn't want anyone, as I said, some people grow up in this stuff and they kind of understand, and they get it, and they kind of say, okay, I see, and Tom is encouraging us to leverage everything we have to honor the Lord. I get that. But I can't help think that every time this goes out, there's somebody here who's going to misunderstand, and not about money. That's fine. I make no apology for talking about money. But the deep misunderstanding would be something like this. All right. So you're saying, if I become a really generous giver, If I become a priority giver and I start tithing and I become and I grow in it and I progressive and I'm a percentage giver, then you're telling me that's what will guard my heart and make me right with God. Now that would be a tragic misunderstanding. Because the Bible not only gives these spiritual disciplines and these helps like being percentage and priority and progressive, but remember Paul is instructing Timothy to talk to born again Christians. And why that's so important is this. If look, you may be the greatest giver in the world. You may be a super percentage giver, and you're tithing all the time, and you're doing all that stuff. But the Bible also says to do it from a cheerful heart. Now, what are your 3 steps to a cheerful heart? How do you get a cheerful heart? You can't. You can't give your way into, you understand? There's no amount of giving, there's no amount of good deeds that could set you right with God. No, a cheerful heart. And those for whom this sermon really applies is simply this. You can't do it. That cheerfulness has to be given to you from above. God, out of his great love for you, has to work in your heart until percentage giving and priority giving and progressive giving come out of the overflow of what your heavenly Father has done for you. That's how giving works. It's a matter of the heart. It's a reflection of our Father's generosity. He who is himself a giver, not a taker, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Right? And as a reflection of our Father's generosity, out of the overflow of our heart, I hope that these disciplines will be of an encouragement and a help to the born-again Christians in this room, that they would become priority if they're not, and percentage and progressive givers. To those who are not yet believers, receive the greatest gift of all, salvation in Jesus Christ. Let's pray. God, grant that we would grow in this grace. As believers, grant that we would grow in percentage and priority and progressive giving. And God, if there's anyone here who's clinging, they're looking for hope, I pray, oh God, that they would run into the arms of the greatest giver, that they would run into your arms, God, you who, while we were still in sin, when we couldn't pay you back, we still can't pay you back with good deeds, you who are rich in grace and love and mercy for us, and they would receive your salvation, be forever your child, and out of an overflow of gospel good news, they would live lives that are rich in good deeds. In Jesus' name.